Have you ever wondered what it takes to stand against an entire nation alone? Imagine being the sole voice of truth and morality, unshaken in the face of widespread corruption. This is the story of Sayyiduna Lut alayhi salam, a prophet whose mission was a testament to unwavering faith and the ultimate consequences of rejecting divine guidance. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. The story of Lut alayhi salam begins intertwined with that of his uncle, the great prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. When Ibrahim alayhi salam received the call of Allah to leave his homeland and establish the worship of one true God, Lut alayhi salam, his young nephew, chose to accompany him. Imagine their bond, a mentor and his devoted protege, traveling together across lands, united by faith and shared mission. Their journeys brought them to different paths as their prophetic mission diverged. While Ibrahim alayhi salam continued spreading the message of monotheism, Lut alayhi salam was sent to the people of Sodom. This was a community immersed in grave sins and moral corruptions. Among their worst transgressions was their indulgence in acts that defied the nature order set by Allah. The people of Sodom were infamous for their behavior, particularly their practice of approaching men with lust instead of fulfilling their desires lawfully within the bounds of marriage to women. This wasn't just an individual failing, but had permeated the society so deeply that it became normalized, even celebrated like nowadays, unfortunately. The Quran highlights this immorality repeatedly, showing that this wasn't just a personal sin, but a collective, public defiance of divine guidance. The people openly mocked natural laws, disregarded morality, and exhibited arrogance in their corruption. Their gatherings were marked by shameless acts in public spaces, as mentioned in Surah Al-Ankabut. أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ وَتَقْطَعُونَ السَّبِيلَ وَتَأْتُونَ فِي نَادِيكُمُ الْمُنكَرَ. Do you indeed approach men and obstruct the road and commit evil in your gatherings? Their sins weren't limited to personal lust, but extended to a breakdown of social ethics. They obstructed travelers on roads, abused strangers, and turned places meant for community and fellowship into spaces of debauchery and misconduct. Imagine a society where acts of immorality were performed openly, without shame or consequence, where any voice of reason was silenced or ridiculed. Lut alayhi salam repeatedly tried to make them see the gravity of their actions. He called on them to reflect and turn back to lawful, pure relationships ordained by Allah. He reminded them of the blessings Allah had provided, including the creation of mates for companionship and procreation. But their response was one of mockery and stubborn defiance as usual, as highlighted in Surah Hud. قالوا لقد علمت ما لنا في بناتك من حق وإنك لتعلم ما نريد. They said, you have already known that we have no claim to your daughters, and indeed you know what we want. This brazen attitude showcased their rejection of guidance and their arrogance in pursuing their desires, regardless of moral or divine boundaries. Their hearts were hardened and their minds blinded to the consequences of their actions. Their sin wasn't merely in their lust, but in their collective pride and refusal to repent. They turned away from Allah's mercy and challenged His laws with defiance and open rebellion. The Quran described this vividly in Surah Al-A'raf. وَلُوطًا إِذْ قَالَ لِقَوْمِهِ أَتَأْتُونَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ شَهْوَةً مِنْ دُونِ النِّسَاءِ بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ مُسْرِفُونَ. And mention Lut when he said to his people, do you commit such immorality as no one has preceded you with from among the worlds? Indeed, you approach men with desire instead of women. Rather, you are a transgression people. Imagine living in a society where corruption is not only widespread, but also normalized, unfortunately for the second time, as nowadays. Lut alayhi salam was surrounded by people who saw no fault in their behavior. Day after day, he warned them with sincerity, pleading with them to reflect on their actions. How would you feel if those you tried to guide mocked and ridiculed you in return? How strong must one's faith be to continue under such circumstances? The people of Sodom not only rejected Lut alayhi salam's message, but they also took pride in their transgressions. They mocked his warnings and even threatened him with expulsion. Imagine the isolation Lut alayhi salam must have felt. For sure his heart ached, not for his own sake, but for the fate of a community plunging headlong into destruction. The Quran emphasizes their arrogance in Surah Al-Shu'ara. أتأتون الذكران من العالمين وتذرون ما خلق لكم ربكم من أزواجكم بل أنتم قوم عادون. Do you approach males among the worlds and leave what your Lord has created for you as mates? But you are transgression people. Then, brothers and sisters, came the ultimate test. Allah sent angels disguised as handsome young men to Lut alayhi salam as guests in his home. Imagine the scene vividly. As the angels entered the outskirts of the city, the fields lay quiet under the afternoon scene. Their graceful demeanor and radiant appearances made them stand out immediately. Farmers in the fields paused their work to glance at the strangers. Their looks of curiosity quickly turned into whispers among the townsfolk as the angels moved closer to the center of the city. The angels walked with purpose, their steps steady yet calm. Every so often, someone would stare for a moment too long, drawn by their extraordinary presence. Who are they? Visitors? Murmurs spread quickly through the streets. Of course, brothers and sisters, word reached the heart of Sodom, where the most corrupt among the people lived, fueling an unnatural interest. As the angels approached Lut alayhi salam home, the Prophet was outside, perhaps checking on something. His eyes fell upon the travelers, and he was immediately struck by their noble appearances. But alongside this recognition, a sense of dread grew in his heart. Lut alayhi salam knew his people well. He knew their weaknesses and feared for the safety of these guests. He greeted the visitors and led them into his house as quickly as he could, keeping his voice low and his movements deliberate. Inside, Lut alayhi salam prepared to host them, his heart heavy with anxiety. What should have been an ordinary moment of hospitality became a scene of profound tension. As the sun set and cast a golden hue across the city, the shadows of onlookers stretched longer and longer. Outside, word had spread. Handsome strangers have entered Lut's house. A mob began to form, their intentions veiled. Their whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs into shouts as they made their way to Lut's door. This moment is captured in Surah Hud. ولما جاءت رسلنا لوطا سيء بهم وضاق بهم ذرعا وقال هذا يوم عصيب وجاءه قومه يهرعون إليه ومن قبل كانوا يعملون السوء. And when our messengers came to Lut, he was anguished for them and felt for them great discomfort and said, "This is a trying day." And his people came hastening to him, and before this, they had been doing evil deeds. Imagine the anguish Lut alayhi salam felt in that moment. On one side, he was the host, bounded by the sacred duty to protect his guests. On the other, his people were knocking on his door, their voices growing louder and more aggressive, demanding to commit unspeakable acts. His figure saluted against the dim light inside, pleading with them, his voice steady but heavy with sorrow. He offered them an alternative. قال يا قوم هؤلاء بناتي هن أطهر لكم فاتقوا الله ولا تخزوني في ضيفي أليس منكم رجل رشيد. He said, "Oh my people, they are my daughters, they are purer for you. So fear Allah and do not disgrace me concerning my guests. Is there not among you a man of reason?" Not his words. Is there not among you a man of reason? This profound question challenges us every day. How often do we, as individuals or societies, allow base desires or misguided norms to overpower our sense of reason and morality? When the people persisted, the angels revealed their true identity to Lut alayhi salam. Imagine the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Their calm but firm words broke through the tension. "Do not fear, Lut. We are messengers from your Lord." They reassured him that neither he nor his family, except his wife, would suffer the fate awaiting his people. The angels instructed him to leave the city under the cover of night, warning him not to look back, for the punishment of Allah was imminent. The Quran detailed the destruction of Sodom in Surah Hud. فَلَمَّا جَاءَ أَمْرُنَا جَعَلْنَا عَالِيَهَا سَافِلَهَا وَأَمْطَرْنَا عَلَيْهَا حِجَارَةً مِّن سِجِّيلٍ مَّنضُودٍ مُّسَوَّمَةً عِندَ رَبِّكَ وَمَا هِيَ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ بِبَعِيدٍ. So when our command came, we made the highest part of the city its lowest, and rained upon them stones of layered hard clay, which were marked from your Lord, and Allah's punishment is not far from the wrongdoers. As night fell over the doomed cities, the heavens suddenly grew ominously dark. The stillness of the night shattered as the earth began to rumble violently. The very ground that had once carried their wicked deeds was now convulsing in rebellion against its inhabitants. Without warning, the city were lifted high into the sky, flipped entirely, and hurled back down with unimaginable force. The sound of destruction was deafening. The cries of the people were swallowed by the roar of the calamity. But this was only the beginning, brothers and sisters. The skies then opened, and the rain of punishment descended. Each stone was a precise guide by the divine command, striking the guilty with unerring accuracy. These stones were no ordinary rocks. They were layered hard clay, each one inscribed with the mark of Allah's wrath. Picture the chaos as the streets, homes, and every structure were built relentlessly. The relentless onslaught of stone erased any trace of their arrogant defiance. The torment didn't end there. The winds howled like raging beasts, tearing through what little remained. The very air seemed to carry the weight of judgment, suffocating any who dared linger. The river swelled angrily, engulfing the outskirts of the cities, and the land itself bore scars of the divine reckoning. The once thriving cities became desolate wastelands, a stark reminder of Allah's power and justice. For those who were spared, Lut alayhi salam and his family, the angels had warned them not to look back, for their escape symbolized a complete separation from the sins of the people they were leaving behind. Yet, there was one exception in Lut's household, his wife. Although she outwardly appeared to be part of Lut's family, her heart was aligned with the corrupt society of Sodom. Lut's wife played a unique and tragic, witnessing her husband's unwavering commitment to Allah's commands and the numerous warnings delivered to their people. She harbored loyalty to the sinful ways of her community. Her betrayal wasn't one of open defiance, but of complicity, a silent approval of the corruption that surrounded her. Imagine living so close to a prophet, sharing in his life a mission, yet turning away from the truth when it mattered most. As the family fled under the cover of night, the atmosphere was heavy with divine warning. Do not look back. the angels had instructed. The command was clear. Their salvation, brothers and sisters, depended on completely severing ties with the past. Yet Lot's wife hesitated. Perhaps it was her lingering attachment to the life she had refused to let go, or perhaps it was a moment of defiance. Whatever the reason, she turned back, and in that moment her fate was sealed. The Quran vividly described her punishment in Surah Al-Tahrim. ضرب الله مثلا الذين كفروا امرأة نوح وامرأة لوط كانتا تحت عبدين من عبادنا صالحين فخانتاهما فلم يغنيا عنهما من الله شيء وقيل ادخلا النار مع الداخلين. Allah presents an example of those who disbelieved, the wife of Noah and the wife of Lot. They were married to two of our righteous servants, but betrayed them. So they, their husbands, availed them not against Allah at all, and it was said, enter the fire with those who enter. Her betrayal serves as a profound warning. It shows that proximity to righteousness and truth is not enough if one's heart is not aligned with it. Lot's wife became a symbol of hypocrisy and the consequences of failing to let go of worldly attachments in the face of divine commands. As she turned back, she was overtaken by the wrath of Allah and transformed into a pillar of salt, forever frozen as a warning for all who pass by. Her fate stands as a reminder that each individual is accountable for their choices, regardless of their associations or relationships. Imagine the silence that followed this event. Lot alayhi salam and the rest of his family continued their escape, the weight of her absence heavy in the air. They pressed on, their faith in Allah carrying them forward, even as the destruction behind them unfolded in its full, terrifying magnitude. Imagine the silence that followed, a silence so profound it seemed to echo with the lesson of this catastrophic event. What was once bustling with life was now eerily still, reduced to ruins and ashes. The smell of scorched earth lingered in the air, and the eerie emptiness spoke volumes of the fate of those who defy Allah's Azza wa Jal command. This was no ordinary destruction. It was a testimony to the consequences of arrogance and moral decay. So, what do we learn from it? The main lesson from Lot's story is that sodomy, homosexuality, rainbow community, whatever they call it, is totally 100% haram. And its consequences is also 100% destruction and punishment from Allah Azza wa Jal. This is a fact in our religion, Islam. Another lesson is even accepting or supporting these actions without participating or complicity in it has the same punishment from Allah, which is exemplified in Lot's wife. Another lesson lies in understanding the balance of Allah's mercy and justice. Despite repeated warnings, the people of Sodom choose to persist in their sins, leading to their destruction. This serves as a reminder that divine guidance is a gift we must embrace, At last, this story is not just about the past. It has timeless relevance. In today's world, where moral boundaries are often blurred, how do we stand firm in our principles? Do we have the courage to speak the truth and resist societal pressures, just as Lot alayhi salam did? We know we are sinful. So, hey brothers and sisters, if you enjoyed this video, you are going to love this one right here, where I share the story of another prophet. Be sure to check it out. Salam.